Hey everyone, hope you're having a great day. I'm still spending a lot of time testing out the stratagem updates and the revisions from the most recent patch, and today we'll be discussing the Rocket Sentry.
Another triumph from managed.
Now, I already made a deep dive video about a month ago for the Rocket Sentry, and although I try to be as objective as possible when it comes to these analysis videos, it was really hard not to highlight just how poor the Rocket Sentry performs. There was a lot of issues, and there was about 1 in every 10 comments for that video saying that the autocannon Sentry just outperformed the Rocket Sentry in every way. And you know what? I couldn't argue against it. And after trying it out and comparing it myself, I just couldn't help but agree with them. But now, the Rocket Sentry is back, and it feels like it had its own little character development arc, because in my opinion, it is now one of the best sentries in the game. Of course, we'll go into the patch notes, but before we get into that, let's quickly review the weaknesses of the Rocket Sentry and why it needed these adjustments. Starting with the enemy prioritization, the targeting it was one of the main selling points for the Rocket Sentry, but it did a really poor job at deciding whether or not to hit a Bile Titan or a Scavenger, and that for me was really frustrating, as I can imagine it was for a lot of other people. It also suffered from poor accuracy, like abysmally poor. Like, if it was to target something like a jump pack bot trooper or a hunter, they would be able to outrun it because it doesn't even look like the Rocket Sentry was doing a job at trying to lead the shots. And if it was to hit it, the damage output was also really poor and left a lot to be desired. It would always shoot 2 rockets for a single target, and that also made ammo conservation a concern. The shock absorption gel ship upgrade wasn't giving it all the extra ammo it was supposed to get, and survivability for the Sentry was also just really poor. It would go down to something like a single rocket, and the blast absorption ship upgrade was not affecting it, or really any of the Sentries exactly, so I'm not going to hold this against the Rocket Sentry specifically. And when you combine all these weaknesses together, it kind of made the Rocket Sentry this very high maintenance, low return type of stratagem that it kind of just left a lot to be desired. And in the patch notes, thankfully, a lot of this was actually addressed, so let's get right into it. And let's start with the fact that they decreased the spread, which makes the Rocket Sentry now a lot more accurate. They also said something here where it prioritizes larger targets, and I don't know what to make with this statement. It sucks they didn't explain anything specific about this, because we know it prioritizes larger targets, or it should, or was supposed to. But does this mean here that they fixed it, or what exactly, happened here? Range was also increased, which is good. You get an extra 25 meters. And they decreased the rocket per salvo from 2 to 1, so it has better ammo economy. And this is good because there will be units that only need 1 rocket to kill, like a bot trooper or a scavenger, but you would always commit 2. The explosion radius was quadrupled from 1 meters to 4 meters. And this is actually a great change because in my other video, I was just showing how virtually there was no splash radius, let alone splash damage. And it sucked that the Rocket Sentry had poor accuracy, but it needs direct hits to be able to do anything because it had no splash damage or splash radius. So I'm very glad about this change. And even though they did mention that the explosive damage, the armor penetration for the explosive damage was decreased, the rocket projectile is still able to penetrate heavy armor, and they even increased the projectile damage by 50% from 200 to 300. Looking at it a bit deeper, we read the blog post, which kind of justifies Arrowhead's changes for the Rocket Sentry. They highlighted here that it was very inconsistent against medium and larger enemies, and although it wasn't specified, I'm going to say that this was meant in regards to target prioritization. They wanted to make it a lot more consistent against these enemies, and they're also improving the ammo economy. Honestly, kind of disappointed about the lack of details here. I was wishing they would give us just a bit more insight as to the tweaks they made about the target prioritization to the Rocket Sentry, because it was one of the main selling points for bringing it with you. But the only way we're really going to find out about how much it's improved is by bringing it in-game. And since I've already done a deep dive video about the Rocket Sentry, I'm mainly going to be highlighting the differences between the Rocket Sentry pre-patch and post-patch. A large majority of the things I've covered in that video a month ago I feel are still valid, such as my recommended playstyle, loadout options, and other interactions such as the Sentry's backblast. So let's start with target prioritization. And for the most part, yeah, it's more consistent. The units I'm expecting it to hit, it does hit, most of the time. It would still lock onto things such as bot fabricators and command bunkers, things it cannot destroy. And on the bug front, the only thing it has an issue with is Bile Titans. For some reason, it would shoot enemies beside it or underneath it before it actually targets the Titan itself. Pre-patch, I did acknowledge that there was some form of target prioritization that was being calculated for the Sentry, but I felt like it was just a variable amongst the other things I was considering. The distance from the Sentry to an enemy still seemed to be the deciding factor when it came to which enemy to target. But now I'm seeing the Rocket Sentry focus on units even at the max range, despite there being smaller units closer to the Sentry, which is what I'm expecting, and that's great. So target prioritization for the Rocket Sentry, although not perfect, I would say it's still greatly improved. Now let's see the damage and accuracy, and to start, it just has splash damage, like meaningful splash damage. A big issue pre-patch was that due to poor accuracy, whenever the sentry locked onto something like a hunter, it would shoot at it and just barely miss. Now this wouldn't be an issue if the rocket explosion had fair splash damage and radius, but it had neither. So what you basically had was a sentry that needed direct hits, but was really bad at landing those direct hits. And now, not only is it more accurate, but in the event that it does miss, the splash damage is enough to at least damage that intended target. Beyond that though, the rocket is now a lot more useful when it comes to mob clearing. You can now get multi-kills with a single rocket, and this helps the sentry because it gets rid of targets both approaching it and targets that could potentially block projectiles meant for the larger, high-value enemies. The increase to the projectile damage also reduced the time to kill on a lot of heavy units. Pre-patch, it was able to take out things like the automaton dropships. It still can, but the difference now is that it can actually kill them before they leave the map very consistently. You're also able to kill factory striders, hulks, tanks, and battle titans, not insanely faster, but comparatively faster. The reduced spread made it a lot more consistent with the rockets hitting the target. As I mentioned earlier, watching this thing try to hit gunships, for example, was just so hard to watch. I would get secondhand embarrassment knowing that that was my sentry missing every shot. And now it's actually rare to see a rocket miss, and I would go far as to say that it is now a great anti-air option, which is great because aerial patrols now exist. As for the extended range, I was not expecting it, but I'll definitely take it. It's a great buff to have. This gives you a lot more options as to where you want to call it in. Something small though I did notice is that when affected by the environment such as a blizzard or a sandstorm, visibility is reduced across the board, including your sentries. Before the patch, the range was limited to 30 meters, but after the patch, it's still able to shoot targets that are as far out as 45 meters. In regards to survivability, pretty much all the sentries were buffed against bullets. Arrowhead introduced this thing called durability, which is basically small arms fire or resistance to small arms fire, and sentries went from 0 to 80% durability, and this would do great against the automatons, not so much against the bugs because they're really going to be killing your sentry by just meleeing it to death or with bile spew. If it was to get shot at by, let's say, troopers or heavy devastators, it would do well, but what's really putting it in the grave were rockets. And right after the patch, I would test out some sentries and they would still get one-shotted by rockets. But thankfully, less than a week after that big patch was a small fix, which gave sentries now a higher destruction value, so most explosions do not instantly destroy them regardless of the damage amount. This is I feel like this is what's going to make sentries a thing now, because now they can survive even at the high difficulty levels against rocket devastators, gunship barrages. They're going to still power through them and still put out a lot of work. Now, as to what they meant by higher destruction value, I'm not sure. I'm not sure if this meant that they fixed the blast absorption upgrade, or if they gave sentries either increased explosive resistance or just higher base health. But to sum it all up, sentries can now tank a lot. That does not mean they can tank everything. They're still going to get one shot by a cannon turret. A charger can still run them over, and they won't be able to survive an entire Bile Titan's puke. So it's not invincible, but can now survive a whole litany of things, which is making them a lot more viable these days. Beyond that though, there's also a couple new things I learned about the Rocket Sentry post-patch. One is that when fighting a factory strider, it will first lock onto the cannon turret on its back before shooting at the body. It's able to kill the cannon turret in about 7 shots and then finish off the factory strider with a little over 10 more rockets. Next, I was not able to have it successfully lock onto a streaker nest pre-patch, but now I'm seeing it lock onto a nest and even destroy it. So now it has a lot more utility when it comes to bringing it into bug planets. Also, now that behemoth chargers are a common thing, especially on higher difficulties, in terms of how it does against them, well, it does maybe 4 to 5 rockets to kill a basic charger and about 8 to 9 to kill a behemoth charger. Everything else about the Rocket Sentry, though, in my opinion, remains the same. It still suffers from that one quirk where if an enemy is locked onto and it gets within 10 meters of the sentry will not fire, essentially soft locking it. And the few ways it's going to break out of this loop is 1, the target gets out of range, 2, the sentry loses vision of the target, or 3, you intervene or someone intervenes and kills the target. And it's because of this that I still feel like with these changes, it still does better against the automatons than the terminids. Pre-patch and against the terminids, the amount of bugs coming at you would make it hard for the sentry to even get a rocket out, because it would just target a bug and then just stay on it. And there's so many bugs that you would have to clear them all out yourself before it's able to lock onto something else and fire. Against the bots, it would have a similar issue, but not for the same reasons. And that's because it would even be destroyed before it can fight back. But now with the increased survivability and the explosive and bullet durability, it does a lot better job against automatons. And these additional explosion and small arm fire resistance doesn't really do well, or doesn't really apply when you're fighting against the bugs. Still, it's not unplayable against the terminids. Just make sure that you're close enough to your sentry to supervise it, just not too close that you're affected by a backblast or the explosive radius sends you into a ragdoll. Also, just be sure to bring a weapon that can 1. Draw a lot of enemy aggro quickly, and 2. Something that you can use to peel enemies off of your sentry without damaging it. So I'd avoid using things like a crossbow or an eruptor and would opt for something else like a SMG or that new carbine liberator. So overall, the Rocket Sentry definitely improved. There's still some kinks to work out. Target prioritization still sometimes does not do what you expect it to. And the shock absorption gel still only gives your Rocket Sentry an additional 25% extra ammo rather than the 50% it's supposed to. It is great to see a lot of people now realizing the potential of the Rocket Sentry and bringing it with them in their dives. I will go as far as to say that the Rocket Sentry is now a useful anti-air, anti-heavy, and a decent mob clearing tool. And if you haven't tried it out, I encourage you to at least give it a shot, especially if you're going against the automatons. That's it for the video. If you like what you heard and like what you see, be sure to like and subscribe. If you enjoy videos such as these and Helldivers 2 content in general, be sure to stay tuned as I have a lot of ideas currently in the works. I'm also curious to see how you guys feel about the Rocket Sentry after the changes, so be sure to let me know in the comments. Thanks again for checking out the video and have a nice day.